All right, everybody. Welcome to the final keynote portion of our colloquium today. It's my pleasure to introduce Malcolm Johnson, who was elected the Deputy Secretary General of the ITU on 24th of October 2014, and he started his mandate on January 1st, 2015. Secretary Johnson has a very distinguished career. From 2007 to 2014, he served as the director of ITU's Standardization Bureau. In this post, he spearheaded activities in cybersecurity, climate change, and accessibility. He increased the involvement of developing countries, a topic that we heard about earlier today, and academia and ITU standards activity. He also introduced the notion of free downloads of ITUT's recommendations and initiated a program to address developing country concerns over lack of interoperability and conformity to ITU standards. He achieved a threefold increase in the activities of ITU's telecommunication standards sector without increasing its budget. And so that's a huge, huge success to increase activities while not at the same time incurring extra costs. Between 2003 and 2006, Mr. Johnson was the international coordinator of the United Kingdom's Office of Communications, where he had lead responsibility for the United Kingdom's ITU. Mr. Johnson graduated from the University of Wales, Cardiff, with an MS and BS first-class honors degrees in 1976. He's a chartered engineer, a fellow in the Institute of Engineering and Technology, and is an honorary professor of Amity University and an academician of the International Telecommunication Academy. He is fluent in English and French, and he also has some knowledge of Spanish, so I guess he's going to welcome questions in multiple different languages. So with that, please join me in welcoming Secretary Johnson.
Thank you very much, David. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you in this renowned institution and to have had the opportunity to listen to extremely interesting discussions in the two panels we had this morning. I'd like to congratulate Carnegie Mellon University and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace for putting together this event and the previous event that was in Washington. I think it's quite a challenge and to bring together issues on the technology side and the policy side. But it really is quite essential now because they're quite inextricable because a decision on technology has got policy implications and a decision on policy will have technology implications. So I'd really like to congratulate you for putting together this event. And also thank you for the opportunity to talk to you a bit about ITU. It was mentioned briefly in the panels, and especially the ITU conference on the World Conference on International Telecommunications that was mentioned in the lead up to the discussions on the internet governance. But despite the fact that ITU is the UN specialized agency for telecommunications and information communication technology, ICTs, and everyone today is interested in ICTs, people throughout the world and businesses throughout the world more and more dependent on ICTs. ITU is still a fairly unknown organization, less known than most of the UN agencies. So it's always, I always take the opportunity to talk to people a bit about ITU and to explain a bit about it. Because when it has been mentioned, especially in the lead up to the WICIT in 2012, I think there was a lot of misunderstanding of really what the organization was about. And I think one of the reasons it's so little known is the fact that it doesn't hit the headlines very often because it's quite effective at doing what it's supposed to be doing. And if there were more problems around, like satellites interfering with each other, bumping into each other, if mobile phones interfered with televisions and car electronics, and you weren't able to use your mobile phone when you moved from one country to another, probably ITU would be a bit better known. So I'll just take this opportunity to run through the organization briefly and point out a few fairly unique aspects of ITU. First of all, it's a very old organization. Even though it's a UN organization, it's around 80 years older than the UN, because in fact it's the oldest international organization. Goes back to 1865, and the reason that it was created was because there was a need to sort out the transborder interconnection and interoperability of the telegraph service in Europe at that time. So European countries got together and formed this organization. It was called initially the International Telegraph Union. So it was ITU right from the beginning, right up till now. It's ITU. And really the core function of ITU is still to ensure international interconnectivity and interoperability. That's the core function. And of course the task is much more complicated today than it was then. And another unique feature of ITU is the fact that it has a very strong private sector presence. Quite unusual for the UN organization to have a large private sector membership. We have over 700 companies are members of ITU. And in fact, much of the work is driven by experts from these companies, especially on technical standards work. And until recently, of course, these companies were the telecom operators and the telecom vendors. But because ICTs is now getting into all walks of life, and many different industry sectors rely more and more on ICTs, the ITU membership is becoming much more diverse. So now we have utility companies joining, we have motor manufacturers joining, and of course all the IT companies and most of the internet companies are joining. And we have also, by the way, a number of organizations that are members of ITU, both international government organizations, but non-governmental organizations as well. And so we have the Internet Society, for example, as a member. The IETF is a member and participates in ITU, and that's very important for us to have that close collaboration between the standards work that we do in ITU and the standards work that the IETF does. And in fact, most of the regional internet registries are also members of ITU. And another feature which I think is quite unique for the UN is that we reach decisions and conclusions almost invariably through consensus building. Very, very rare to have a vote in the ITU. And I believe that culture goes back, in history, and it's because that we have to reach agreement on the use of the radio spectrum. And of course, radio frequencies don't respect borders. So countries have to get together and agree on the global use of frequencies. And if they didn't, then of course they'd be interfering with each other, and there would be mutually degradation of the services that they offer. So this, in the world conferences we hold on this treaty on the use of the spectrum, countries have a lot of pressure on them to reach mutually satisfactory agreement. And that is a unique feature, I believe, and that's why the work in this area has been very successful, because countries do make a lot of effort to compromise on their initial positions going into a conference so that they can go away with what everyone can consider to be a mutually satisfactory conclusion. So one of the phrases you often hear at the end of one of these conferences that everyone is equally unhappy, because they all go away not exactly everything that they wanted, but it's good enough and they can live with it. So that's why we've been very successful for a very long time in dealing with the issues, especially on radio spectrum. But of course, over the 151 years of ITU's existence, technology has changed incredibly, of course, from the telegraph to the telephone, from the radio to television to satellite, from fixed to mobile, analog to digital, internet to Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence. But ITU has always been striving to bring the benefits of this technology to all countries and all the citizens of the world. We have 193 governments that are members of ITU. Of course, the majority are developing countries. So it's very important that we bring the benefits of this technology to those people. It was clearly a world where everyone is connected to the internet will be a better world. Be a better world for being informed, for being educated, for receiving health care, and for being productive and really enjoying a better quality of life. So we need to ensure that all these services that are now available to people in the developed world are also brought to the people in the developing world. And clearly what's important for them is to have the full benefit of the internet. And that can only be achieved if they have access to high-speed broadband access to the internet. It's only if you have that high-speed access can you really benefit from all these innovative products and services that are available. So this is why ITU always emphasizes the need for the provision of broadband and emphasizing the fact that this is not a luxury anymore, but it's an essential utility that all countries should have. And last year, as you know, the UN adopted the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, and with 17 Sustainable Development Goals identified, the very challenging, very ambitious goals, such as ending poverty and hunger and providing quality education for all, and clean water and sanitation, all to be achieved by 2030. And for each of these 17 SDGs, there are a number of targets. There's a total of 169 targets to be achieved. And if you look at these targets, it's clear they can't be achieved without widespread access to high-speed broadband services. And for example, if you look at the target for halving the number of deaths and injuries on roads, clearly that's going to need the use of ICTs for smart transport management. And of course, it's been well recognized that ubiquitous cars, self-driving cars will greatly reduce accidents. So that's another example of the importance of ICTs just on that target. And then doubling the rate of energy efficiency. Clearly that's going to require a lot of widespread use of smart meters in homes. It's going to need very innovative energy-saving solutions. And then another target is to substantially control the use of water to improve the water efficiency. And this, again, will require ICTs, especially for managing irrigation. Our irrigation is the biggest use of water. And clearly, ICTs which can be used to ensure that the water is cut off at the optimum amount of time for irrigation is very important on reducing water consumption. And they can use the technology also to identify leaks and to send people to quickly stop those leaks. So that's another area. And then when we come to looking at combating climate change, again, it's clearly that you can only reduce greenhouse gas emissions to the extent that the climate experts say is necessary through the use of clean technologies. So as ITU is the lead UN agency for ICTs, we clearly have an important role to play in achieving these sustainable development goals. And of course, access to the internet is now mostly by smartphones. Smartphones are now the predominant way that people throughout the world access the internet. So more and more people requiring faster connections to download more and more data puts a lot of pressure on the frequency spectrum. Frequency spectrum allocated for mobile use. And there's very little spectrum that isn't used. You have to go right up to the 60, 70 gigahertz bands where there's less congestion, but other than that, all spectrum is used. So trying to find allocations for more mobile spectrum means taking spectrum away from other services such as broadcasting or satellites. And we have to get international agreement to that, because if you didn't have globally agreed bands, then you wouldn't be able to use your phones moving from one country to another. But also the cost of those phones would be substantially greater if you weren't able to benefit from the economies of scale of a global market. So adherence to global standards is very important to reduce costs, but also to ensure interoperability. And as I said, the development of these standards is something that ITU has been doing for a very long time, especially for the standards used by networks to carry all this data and communications. Almost all telecom networks rely on ITU standards. And with the Internet of Things coming and billions of devices being connected, and 5G coming along in 4 or 5 years' time, there's going to be a tremendous demand on the network. So this is something that ITU is looking at currently and developing standards that will be able to cope with this demand on the networks. As I said, bringing the benefits of this technology to the developing countries is very much a goal of the ITU, and we develop guidelines on policies and regulations that countries could adopt that would encourage and facilitate the investment that's necessary to roll out broadband in countries. And clearly in developing countries, this is quite a challenge because many of these countries, 80% of the population is living in rural areas. So it's difficult to make a business case for bringing broadband to some of these villages. And you've seen that in India in particular, the government is committed to do this, but is having a great difficulty in finding the right sort of public-private partnership that would encourage investment in bringing broadband to these people. So clearly these are challenges that we have to address, and we've seen that there are a lot of progress. There's now 2.2 billion smartphones in use. So a lot of progress has been made. But the bad news is that according to ITU's data gathering over this year, the divide between the industrialized countries and the least developed countries has actually grown. And another gap that's been identified is the gap between access from men to the broadband and women. There's around about 200 million less women accessing the internet than men, it's been estimated. So although we have around about half the world's population now connected to the internet, it still leaves like 3.9 billion people still to be connected. And if you look at the least developing countries, it's quite a sad story. In fact, it's only 1 out of 7 people in least developed countries that are connected. So as the industrialized world hurdles ever faster to ubiquitous access and affordable access to broadband, there's a crucial gap in this when we look at on a worldwide basis. So many people are losing out on access to education, to health, and to finance services that would greatly benefit their social economic development. The UN produced a report on progress on SDGs, and it will produce this each July as we go forward to 2030. But last July's report gave some startling statistics. 60 million children of primary school age are not attending school. There are 38 million deaths annually from non-communicable diseases, and 6 million children under the age of 5 die every year, mostly from easily preventable causes. 30% of urban populations globally are living in slum-like conditions, and 950 million people globally have no means of sanitation, no clean water. So these are huge challenges that we need to do more to connect the world and to bring the benefits of broadband to all people, wherever they live and whatever their means. We need to make sure that hospitals are connected to outlying clinics, and that the clinics are connected to patients. We have to make sure that universities are connected to schools, and schools connected to all children of all ages, and also that the governments themselves are also connected to the people that they serve. The international community needs to work together to integrate the UN Sustainable Development Goals into the country's national development strategies. And it's essential that governments recognize the power of ICTs and broadband to drive progress. ICT skills are considerably lacking in many countries, and this is something that needs to be addressed because economic growth depends very much now on that. There are surprisingly many innovations occurring in developing countries that need to be fostered and sponsored. And getting this message across to governments is very important. The World Bank came out with a very good statistic that showed that a 10% increase in broadband access in countries can result in up to 1.38% increase in GDP in the developing world. So there is a lot of statistics and evidence to prove the benefits of broadband to bring countries to meet the SDGs and to improve the social economic development in countries. And we need to work together. We have to work with governments, with industry, with civil society, non-governmental bodies, as well as governmental bodies. As has been said this morning, everyone has to work together. We have to cooperate and coordinate and collaborate if we're going to achieve these sustainable development goals. And clearly, one essential element will be the trust and security that people feel they have when they use this technology. So trust and security is a particularly important element. And this is what another aspect of ITU's work is to help countries to develop their national cybersecurity strategies, to help them with their computer incident response teams, implementation, and to really build capacity, human capacity in these countries to take benefit of this technology. So since 2011, so it's quite recent for ITU, we have a new category of membership for academia. That to research in ITU is renowned technical side and that the very ambitious goals that were adopted last year, the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, can be met. So I'd like to send out that invitation to you, whether you're from this university or any other university. We're very keen to have you participating in ITU. I think I've run out of my time. There's a lot more I could tell you about ITU, but I must keep to the very strict time that David's been keeping to today. And thank you for your attention.
That's great. We're going to take some questions. I do want to make two remarks that came up during your talk. The first is, actually, Andrew Carnegie, when he came over, his first job in Pittsburgh was working on telegraph systems. And so this is of special interest to us. The second is you talked about ITU's efforts to help educate and build incident response teams. And of course, Carnegie Mellon is very proud of CERT, which was the first incident response. With that, I'd like to open it up for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and someone will bring a mic to you.
Hi, Mr. Secretary, do you anticipate with the recent hacking that occurred, allegedly by Russia on the U.S. election, that the UN will have any role in discipline or in safeguarding hacking?
Well, not on that specific issue, because the UN and the ITU, we never get into specific issues. National in the use of isITU, and in fact, WSIS and security in the use of ICTs. So it's something that we work on, but it's on to bring the benefits of that to all countries and in all aspects of the use of ICTs. So don't look at any specific national issues.
Thank you. This is Tim over here. Thank you very much for these remarks. And the 2012 conference in Dubai has come up a couple of times today already. And I was curious what the ITU as an organization took away from the conference based on what we heard earlier as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Because I feel there's quite a lot of misunderstanding about that particular conference. It clearly wasn't a success because only half ITU's 193 member states signed up to the treaty. So normally, when we have a conference to amend the international treaty on the use of the radio spectrum and the satellite orbits, that's called the radio regulations. And that treaty is amended every 4 years. All the countries present already immediately at the end of the conference sign up to it. So for us to have a conference where only half the member states sign up to it was really unfortunate. I think it's to do with the lead up to the conference, which made it almost impossible to get a good result. And because there were a lot of stories going around by ITU attempting to take over the internet, and the freedom of the internet was at risk. But as I was saying, in ITU we have this culture of working by consensus. So I don't believe that it was as dangerous as was predicted, but it made countries come to the conference with very strict red lines, what could be accepted, what couldn't be accepted. And also, of course, when you talk about ITU, sometimes people think of ITU as the secretariat in Geneva. We're based in Geneva, secretariat of around 750 staff. But it's a secretariat, it's not an executive. ITU is the membership. So the membership is 193 governments, around 700 private sector companies, 140 academia, and a variety of other organizations that are members. So it was a lesson, I believe, for the membership. Since then, a lot of effort from the membership to make sure it doesn't happen again. We had a World Telecom Policy Forum specifically on internet shortly after that conference. It was very successful. We reached a unanimous agreement on the opinions coming out of it. So I think since then, there's been a lot more effort from member states to make sure that we can reach consensus on these issues. And I hope that when we look at revising this treaty, and a group will start work in January to look at revising that treaty, I hope very much, and this, by the way, is the intention of the chairman of that group, is to look at the elements in the treaty which prevented countries from signing up to it, And if you look at it, there's very little in it that causes a problem. And most of it is not in the treaty. It's in the preamble, or it's in the resolution. There was a resolution on internet, which doesn't say very much, but the fact that it refers to the internet was a problem. So I would very much hope that we can resolve that issue and take out these problem areas and have a treaty which the full membership can sign up to.
We have time for one last question.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a question. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Geneva, and somebody mentioned to me that at a recent ITU meeting, the subject of this digital object architecture, DONA, came up. And the way it was presented to me was that it's potentially an alternative protocol system, especially for the Internet of Things. Digital identifier and security means. And it was presented as though it would be an alternative model to ICANN for the Internet of Things, and it might go under the ITU. And I'd just love to hear your characterization of that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We had a World Conference on standardization a few weeks back. And so this was an issue that was discussed. And basically the technology is incorporated in a sort of a general standard that was adopted by the ITU on digital object identifiers. The idea of the standard was to ensure interoperability between different types of technologies. So it wasn't specifically on that technology. But that technology is being used in the ITU, and as ITU offers it to other UN agencies, because it's a unique, persistent, and like some are using it more widely for other things. But it's not specifically an ITU technology. And it was promoted, let's say, to some extent by some members of the ITU. But it was agreed at the Council this year that it would only be used for those purposes, and ITU wouldn't be promoting it as an alternative to the DNS. But as I said, we have 193 governments, we have 700 private sector companies, et cetera, et cetera. So we have thousands of experts participating in ITU work. And we can't be accountable for the views of all those. So, you shouldn't take the views expressed by some certain individuals in ITU meetings as being an ITU view, which sometimes happens.
All right. I'd like to thank Secretary Johnson once again.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank everyone here for paying attention and joining us in this really important international conversation that talks about policy and talks about technology and where they come together and where some of the sharp edges might be that we should have a conversation about going forward. I want to thank our panelists and especially our moderators, who are very busy people as experts in the field, for taking their time to come to us in Pittsburgh. So let's give them all one more round of applause. Thank you. I'd also like to thank, once again, the Deputy Secretary Johnson. I'd also like to thank the Carnegie Foundation for their generous gift to make this possible. And I'd also like to thank, in particular, the staff who have spent many countless hours putting together this program. And so can we have the staff that helped put together this program please stand up? They might actually be outside ready helping us. So thank you, Kate. You'll see Megan, Daniel, Lauren all roaming around. And so we must recognize their efforts. Without this, it wouldn't happen. I also want to finally conclude by thanking you all for coming here and taking time out of your day. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you in the future at future Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and Carnegie Mellon events. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon.